I believe your internet connection through Big Marker should be starting up. So a welcome to everyone to this Royal Town Planning Institute East of England Regional Activities webinar. The focus of today's event is on the technical challenges of building offshore wind farms and getting that electricity onshore and the implications for local authorities and communities. Just as a brief introduction, my name is Adam Banham. I'm one of the volunteers with the Regional Activities Committee. I'm joined today by Beverly McLean, who's a fellow volunteer, and Fiona Fowle, you've probably come across in the process of booking for this webinar. She's the regional coordinator for the RTPI East of England. We'll get to the goods as quickly as we can, as it were. We've got three great speakers today, and I'm delighted to introduce them. First up, we'll have Graham Gunby, who's the National Infrastructure Planning Manager for Growth and Highways within the Directorate at Suffolk County Council. His perspective will be on the Centre for Excellence they've got there in relation to NSIPs, or Nationally Significant Infrastructure Projects. Our second speaker will be Tom McGarry. He's Deputy Director for External Affairs Strategic Infrastructure at National Grid Electricity Transmission. His focus for his talk will be on the Great Grid Upgrade, and specifically the 180-kilometre pylon route that will be proposed from Norwich to Tilbury in Essex. Our third speaker will be Sherry Atkins. She's the onshore consents lead for Equinor, and her focus will be on their Sheringham Shoal offshore wind farm project. The plan there is to bring the electricity onshore at Sheringham in North Norfolk, and to bring that energy down to the Norwich main substation. We've got 90 minutes for this webinar today, so roughly 20 minutes or so for each speaker. We'll then have a Q&A session at the end. It's probably worth saying that these are huge projects. They're attracting tremendous attention through the media and public debate. Whatever your personal views, whatever the views of your organisation, I would encourage you to approach this as a learning opportunity, and to listen to our speakers with an open mind. Just in terms of a few practical points, we've got over 200 people on the call today, so to reduce background noise, we've automatically muted your microphone, but there is a chat box and Q&A feature at the right of the Big Marker platform. Please use that, and we'll try to get to as many of the questions as we can during the Q&A. All the presenters, as far as I'm aware, are happy for their presentations to be shared. So if you would like a copy, then do get in contact with Fiona. If you do lose contact through to the webinar in any way, then please try the link that you were emailed previously to join back in. If we do lose connectivity of any of the speakers, then obviously we will relaunch as soon as we can. I think that just leaves me to thank you for participating today on behalf of the RTPI. I hope you enjoy it and find it useful. Graham, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks very much, Adam. I will come to the Centre of Excellence. So Suffolk County Council, along with many other local authorities, has received money from the Infrastructure and Capacity Fund, Innovation and Capacity Fund, to help disseminate knowledge in respect of NSIPs, and how to help local authorities really deal with the numerous schemes that we're now encountering. And what we do is we are, for our part in Suffolk, last year we ran a series of webinars and a live conference in Bury St Edmunds, and we're doing similar this year. But what I'll do to set the context and why really we got into it is really related to the numerous NSIPs that we're kind of dealing with in Suffolk at the moment. So I think it'd be quite interesting and useful to trot through those, and then at the end of the presentation, you can see some contact details, and you can sign up for the next session. So so we're dealing with, I mean, these slides, as soon as you write them, they're out of date, aren't they? So it's circa 20 NSIPs we're dealing with over the past 10 years, and the big cheese is really Sizewell. That's an exceptional project in terms of its infrastructure requirements and implications for the local environment, including on local communities. And not least its capital cost, which is now mooted to be in the mid 40 billions. So we, like many other local authorities, we've got a statutory role, and that includes feeding back at the draft stages of the application process, but also responding as a statutory consultee. We've got democratically elected members who have their views on the projects, but we also try and share our knowledge with the local communities, including the parishes. So they are mounting up now, and one of the problems that we face in our authority, and I'm sure some of you will as well, is just the sheer work involved, really. So we're currently in the throes of, or coming up to, examinations on 5 to 6 projects. We're currently coming to the end of the first one. It says B to T, that means Bramford to Twinstead, which is a 400 kilovolt grid reinforcement project. And it's a statutory 6 months period, as many of you will be aware. And it's quite intensive. And leading up to the examination, of course, you'll have the statutory consultation, which is kind of like a dry run for the application that is submitted later. And then obviously once you're through the approval processes, you're into discharge requirements, and projects will start to commence. And so, notably, Sizewell C has commenced in January this year. So this plan here really is just an overview, and the nature of the projects. They've not only do they have a long reach in terms of their influence, but they're actual physically. The projects can be very linear in nature, including offshore grid connections and cable routes, and even what I'd like to say is even the stuff you can see out in the North Sea there, that can have an influence on landscape on the coastline there. So turning into a bit more detail, I just mentioned Bramford to Twinstead. This project has had an extremely long gestation period. I think colleagues have been talking with National Grid since something like 2009. There's a hiatus from 2013 to 2019. There was, in terms of the requirement for the project, as I said before, it's a 400 kilovolt grid reinforcement project, and what that essentially entails is paralleling the existing pylon line. But the positive benefits of that are that it uses an existing route for a smaller set of pylons in the main, and where it comes to national landscapes, it's proposed to be undergrounded. It's kind of a related project is the Norwich to Tilbury project, and this is extremely long in length. It goes all the way from Norwich to Tilbury down there in Essex. It's over 100 miles long. Similar kind of development to Bramford to Twinstead, but it would also include a new substation marked as 3 on that plan, which would provide further offshore connections. That would also entail undergrounding, and we're currently approaching statutory consultation, and will be there's still potential for adjustments to the project, and we'll be seeking additional undergrounding. But projects like this, they can have numerous different impacts, and one of the issues from Norwich to Tilbury is there's numerous airfields along the route, and obviously a line of pylons is not really good for the operation of those. So, continuing the grid reinforcement theme, which no doubt Tom will expand on later, we've got Sea-Link, which is a subsea link down to Kent. That's another form of grid reinforcement, but mainly offshore, and that would require an onshore converter station, which is a very large structure, and then connect to a potential new substation at Friston. Line link, that's quite a novel form of grid reinforcement. It's a multi-purpose interconnector with the Netherlands, but that would include, it's now a multi-purpose interconnector because it's now designed to pick up wind from an offshore Dutch wind farm and to feed into our grid. So interestingly, there's numerous, as you can see from the plan, there's numerous offshore wind farms. East Anglia 1 is actually built and up and running, and East Anglia 3 is now under construction. They came out of sequence, as you know, almost inevitably. And one of the things that the county council and district council partners have been involved with over many years is to seek to avoid multiple onshore routes for cables and trying to coordinate offshore, or at least if they are onshore, to coordinate the routes of the cables. And so SPR stands for Scottish Power Renewables, and a subsequent scheme, which is East Anglia 1 North and 2 there in the yellow. One of the issues there was that the companies tend to maintain that they're separate entities, even though they are both Scottish Power, and ourselves and our colleagues at the district were successful in persuading them that if they were going to come ashore and have their 9-kilometre cable route, that they put in the ducting for the second set of cables, so they wouldn't have to re-excavate the route. And I mean, it seems obvious, but what you'll find is that a lot of the projects, they try to maintain their independence. They're worried about risks from one project falling on a different project. So it takes quite a lot of persuasion for them to get there. And I think the same's true of North Falls and Five Estuaries coming ashore in Essex there. I know they've now signed a cooperation agreement so that they can do similar with their cable routes. So they're really all the offshore wind farms. We are concerned, as I said before, in Suffolk, even if the wind farm doesn't connect into our county, because even though they might appear to be, and they are, a fair way offshore, the wind turbines now, they've evolved from the Scottish Power ones, which are circa 300 metres, which is akin to in height to the Shard in London, and the North Falls and Five Estuaries proposals. The wind turbines are around the 400 metre high mark from water level to the tip of the blade when it's at the top of its rotation. And in actual fact, on the North Falls one, you can see the northernmost cluster that was deemed to have an unacceptable impact on the Suffolk Coast and Heaths national landscape, and the company subsequently withdrew that from their proposals. So going on to, I've already mentioned Sizewell. That's reputedly a 12-year build. I know Hinkley's probably scheduled to go for at least 15, although there was, of course, COVID, and it's the first one in the UK to be built. And I think EDF are hoping to have lessons learned from Hinkley and to streamline their construction process. It would involve a vast number of workers, 10,000 plus. which will be in competition with local employers. And so there are, not just direct effects, there's many indirect effects, as you might imagine. And obviously transport for aggregates, 10 million tonnes is required, is yet another one. At the top of the map there, the Gullwing Bridge, that's slightly unusual in the fact that it's a Suffolk County Council project. David Cameron, when he's Prime Minister, promised £80 million for a new bridge, and there was other money that needed to be found, some from SCC itself, and that's due to open this year. The final section of the Gullwing Bridges should be arriving from Holland in March. Drax, that's a gas peaking plant which uses gas from a high pressure gas main via gas turbines to provide electricity when there are peaks in demand. The Ipswich rail cord there, that's one of the earliest ever NSIPs. I think that was done when it's pre-PINS. It was under the IPC, the Infrastructure Planning Commission, and that's operational. And what that does is it allows trains that are travelling across country to the Midlands to do so without backing into Ipswich station on their way from Felixstowe, where they picked up the containers. Interestingly, Sonica Solar Farm, we're due to have a decision next week. That's been delayed from September last year, and it's it'd be interesting to see what will happen with that. It's very controversial. Potentially, I guess you might be looking at a reduction in the actual area, because it's a very, very large solar farm. So I think what's likely to be happening now, we're keeping an eye on the tech register, and that's, if you Google it, it's where the connection offers are made from National Grid to developers. They apply for a connection, and I think there's a preliminary one, and then there's a more certain one that is provided. And what we're finding is if you have a quick glance at the tech register, you may well find projects within your local authority area, but the health warning on that is that often probably only 50% of them come forward in the end. But we are expecting some more solar developments, and part of that reason for that is that when you've got grid upgrades, it unlocks the potential for solar, etc., because the current grid in many places is running at full capacity. So we've got, as you can see, we've got plenty of energy and a little bit of transport. But going forwards, we're not really, I've mentioned the solars that we think are heading our way, but also going forwards, Tom will talk about the Great Grid Upgrade, and the whole plan is to go carbon neutral by 2050. It's possible that the stuff that's known about now may or may not be sufficient to achieve that. So there may well be further schemes required, but I'm sure Tom can give you in chapter and verse on that. But also other forms of development. So hydrogen has been talked about a lot for a long time, and there are potential developments in East Anglia connected with conversion of North Sea gas to hydrogen, and it's also used in certain industries. The nuclear industry they might actually make their own water for the reactors because it's purer, so they can make it. You can make it from nuclear energy, so-called pink hydrogen, but certainly you may well have a use for it to produce that water. And also, as we know, climate change, East of England, water resources are stretched, and there are various schemes afoot, including recycling of water, and reintroduction into the river systems, but also even potentially new reservoirs, which would have obvious implications for the local area. So in terms of challenges from a local perspective, There's obviously an increasing urgency nationally. There's been a lot of the targets kept on leaping up in terms of offshore wind, and there's a drive to deliver net zero, and it seems to be accelerating as we get nearer the deadline. We are facing seemingly a continuous pipeline of NSIPs. I think it may have been the case at one time that people, why were NSIPs introduced? The regime was introduced to avoid planning roadblocks such as happened with Terminal T5. But in terms of certainly energy is a big driver, as is transport. Every single NSIP is complex. They're all different and often very controversial. We're trying to facilitate community involvement. We as a county and others I'm sure share this view, is that communities often feel like they're presented with a fait accompli, however well the presentations are put together, and we're trying to get a more participatory approach to that. Cumulative impacts, well, it's obvious from the map that I've shown you that there's a lot of large projects in a similar locality, and that's something that we have to try and drive home with the developers, to try and rationalize what they're doing between projects, and we are having some success of that. Employment and skills, they're competing for a limited labor force, and we're trying to capture money to try and facilitate training. And in terms of being able to respond to these projects, there's no fee attached to them that the local authorities are able to use, and therefore local authorities are left to really agree a planning performance agreement with the developer. And if you actually add up the staff time, I think some of us will know that already that cost is considerable. So just going back to where I started, the NSIP Centre of Excellence, SCC have had some money, as have other authorities, to do various work to try and assist in local authorities deal with the NSIPs. And for our part, we're running a series of webinars, and you're invited as obviously RTPI members to sign up to those. And it's not just us talking. We tend to invite developers and experts from other local authorities to come and speak, and certainly we find it to be very useful. Thank you, Chairman. I think that's me done.
That's great. Thank you, Graham. So, without standing on ceremony, we'll move straight to Tom. Thank you, Tom. I think there's a slight problem with your audio, Tom. Still nothing coming through. I'll tell you what we'll do. Shall we move to Sherry? Sherry, would you be willing to speak now, and then we'll sort out Tom's audio and then come back to it?
Yeah, that's no problem.
Okay, thank you. Take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Atkins. I'm the Onshore Consents Manager for the SEP and DEP projects. Those are the Sheringham Shoal and Dudgeon extension projects off the coast of Norfolk. So just a couple of things I was going to cover today. So Graham briefly touched on it, the need for energy infrastructure, a very brief overview into Equinor and our offshore wind portfolio. I was then going to touch on the UK extension projects. Those are the Sheringham Shoal and Dudgeon extension projects, how we've sought to involve the community and how community consultation and engagement has been central to the process. And then some reflections on the process that we've just gone through, and learnings that we'll certainly take on board for the future, and hear other perspectives as well. So in terms of the need for the energy infrastructure, again, Graham touched on this. There's a huge portfolio of energy projects coming into play, and that's reflective of the drive to achieve net zero by 2050. On your screens, you can see a triangle. This is what we call the energy trilemma. So it's about securing an affordable, secure, and sustainable supply of electricity. To do that, and to try and achieve net zero by 2050, the government set a very ambitious target of delivering 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. And this ambition is reflected in national planning policy, and most recently the Energy NPS, which identifies and designates offshore wind development as a critical national priority infrastructure. And then the last bullet point refers to the offshore transmission network. So again, the government's got an ambition, a desire to try and combine transmission technologies, transmission infrastructure that support offshore wind development. And that's an emerging policy, but it's something that we're keen to work towards and contribute to. So I'll go through these slides very quickly, the background to Equinor, but just so you know a bit about who we are. We are an international company, and we seek to turn natural resources into energy assets. Oh gosh, sorry, it's moving. This slide just provides a bit of an overview as to where we operate our offshore wind operations, specifically across the UK, and then moving specifically into the UK itself. We do have a number of operating assets within the UK. We've got the world's first floating offshore wind just off the coast of Scotland, Highwind Scotland. And then we've got the existing Dudgeon and Sheringham projects off the coast of Norfolk. And then we've got a number of different opportunities that we're looking into and developing in parallel as well, including Dogger Bank, which will be the world's largest offshore wind farm once in production, and the Dudgeon and Sheringham extension projects. I just thought it'd be nice to share some of the images of the operations and maintenance base in Great Yarmouth, and the vessel that serves the existing offshore wind assets at Sheringham and Dudgeon, just so you can see what goes on, I guess, behind the scenes. So these are some images of the vessel, and what it looks like from the inside. What happens is our crew goes on for a 2-week period. They go and service the wind turbines, and they come back to base at Great Yarmouth. And this is the base at Great Yarmouth itself. So just so you can, just an opportunity to share some behind the scenes images, I guess. So moving on to the extensions projects, so the Sheringham Shoal and the Dudgeon extensions projects. So this image here shows the location of the existing wind farm assets. You've got Sheringham, which is kind of the diamond shape next to the purple polygon, and Dudgeon slightly north of that. The blue areas show the extensions for Dudgeon. So you've got depth north and depth south. And the area in purple shows the extension for the Sheringham Shoal extension project. This will be connected through a series of cables, which will also connect into an offshore wind offshore substation platform. Those will connect into what we call a landfall, where in effect the offshore cables meet the onshore cables, and that's proposed near Sheringham. Sheringham's just slightly east, and we're proposing a 60-kilometre cable run all the way to Norwich Main before the and where we're proposing also an onshore substation. So in terms of the consenting strategy itself, SEP and DEP, they're actually separate projects in their own right. but we're looking to consent them together. And what that does is that keeps the option to develop the transmission infrastructure together in a combined approach. We understand, I mean, you can let me know if I've got to get this wrong, but we think that we're the first UK offshore wind farm to seek consent for 2 separately owned assets under a single DCO. And this, as I've said, this keeps the opportunity to develop this integrated transmission system. And as a result of that, we have been awarded what's called a Pathfinder status by, well, then BEIS, now DESNZ. We're also the first project to submit what we call a conceded derogation case. So what this means is that we acknowledge that we do have an impact to certain protected species, in this case birds, and we are proposing compensation within the application. Well, we're proposing to do compensation. We need to consent that separately, but that is proposed as part of the package. So this slide just provides a bit of an overview as to the Pathfinder status. We've been awarded Pathfinder status because we are keeping the opportunity open to deliver this coordinated transmission system. We've got a single cable corridor for both projects. We hope that the transmission infrastructure themselves will be developed together. And this is a direction that government policy is moving towards. They're encouraging developers to develop joint infrastructure wherever possible, and the policy development is moving towards encouragement to actually doing this. So moving on to the project vision and objectives. So this was we sought to identify and develop a project vision very early on in the process, because this kind of set the scene and the tone for the development. And our project vision is to make a meaningful contribution to the UK's offshore wind decarbonisation targets. So we've got these 3 themes that fall underneath that. So that includes decarbonisation, so generating electricity by 2030 to meet the government's targets. Security of supply, so supporting the government's commitments for offshore wind generation, and optimisation. And this is basically to make sure that we can generate electricity, optimise the generation of electricity within the site constraints, whilst delivering benefits as skills, employment, ecological enhancements, and so on. And then the slide that you can see in front of you, I won't go into this in that much detail, but the one that the box I just wanted to touch upon was the people box. And this is, it's really key to us. I think this is central to the topic today, to make sure that people are meaningfully engaged. We do have a long-term presence within Norfolk. We do need to behave as a considerate neighbour. We want to continue working in Norfolk. And it's really important that we therefore take into account feedback that the community can share with us. And to do that, we need to create the conditions where the community feels like it can engage with us in a meaningful way. So, as I say, consultation engagement has been central and continues to be central throughout all stages of the design development, and will help to deliver on our project vision and our design objectives. And some of the areas where we are looking to incorporate that feedback and that engagement include skills and employment opportunities, looking at how we can, we've set ourselves some quite high standards, how we can meet those standards, what's important to the community, and we've listed there biodiversity net gain. The project's was proposing to make a voluntary commitment to biodiversity net gain, to take into account the local experience and knowledge. Something that's been key throughout and continues to be key is the cumulative impact, and we continue to engage with other developers operating and building and investing within Norfolk as well. And also being cognizant of the dynamic environment and landscape. New information comes to light frequently, and we need to be able to take that into account and respond in a flexible way. Just because we've submitted an application doesn't mean that, you know, things are done dusted as proposed. We do need to be able to have that flexibility to respond to the changing landscape. So in terms of where we are in respect to the project, we are the yellow triangle. It's not really a triangle. Yellow arrow, I guess. We're in the consenting phase. We submitted our DCO application for SEP and DEP at the end of August 2022. We had hoped that we'd have a decision by now, but the decision has been, the decision determination period has been extended by 3 months, so we should have a decision in place in April this year. Consenting is one milestone that we need to get to before construction and operation. We've got to go through the CFD, contract for difference process, and reach a final investment decision. But in parallel with all of that, we are progressing the design, and we are looking to try and develop the design as the scheme evolves. And in doing so, we take into consideration engineering considerations, land requirements. We're engaging with landowners regularly, environmental considerations, stakeholder considerations, and any new information that comes to light. So this image basically provides an overview of the infrastructure that we propose as part of the offshore wind development. We've got these 2 assets that are fixed. So the Norwich grid substation, the national grid substation, where we're proposing to connect into Norwich Main, that is a fixed asset. That doesn't actually form part of our application. That's already in existence, but we're looking to develop the infrastructure to connect to Norwich Main. And then we've got the location of the wind turbines themselves. And everything else in between has been subject to optioneering. So in terms of optioneering, the next few slides will present some of the key features that have been subject to the optioneering process and what the optioneering process has involved. And this has basically been subject to various design criteria and engineering considerations, together with the landscape of the area itself. And the image on the left shows the location of the cable corridor. It's a fairly wide cable corridor, and I think this dates back to 2020. And the image on the right shows the location of the cable corridor as submitted as part of our DCO application. So the first asset that I just want to talk about was the landfall. And the landfalls is actually proposed in the same location as the landfall for Sheringham and Dudgeon projects. We did look across the coastline to try and find the best location. And different engineering considerations included the length of the cable, the geology, how we'd actually connect into from the offshore area to the onshore area, and the environmental characteristics. So all of these themes were considered, and we actually felt that the best location would be the same location as the landfall for Sheringham and Dudgeon. And what you can see on your screen there, that's what the landfall looks like, in effect, the above ground features of the landfall. The next feature, and I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail because we don't have the time, but it's the cable corridor itself. So we've got various different projects under development within Norfolk. The red long line shows what we're proposing in the cable corridor for SEP and DEP. The, I guess it's turquoise line, shows the cable corridor proposed for Hornsey 3 that is consented and under construction. And the orange line shows the cable corridor for Norfolk Boreas and Vanguard, which is also under construction. And there are other developments as well. So you've got the yellow area there, which is Norwich Western Link. National Highways have started work on the A47 upgrade scheme as well. This doesn't capture everything, but it kind of gives a flavour as to what else is going on in Norfolk at the same time that we're looking to develop SEP and DEP. And in developing the cable corridor and selecting the route, we've taken into consideration we've tried to avoid key environmental sensitive areas, residential areas, and being cognizant of these other developments that are ongoing. Where we cannot avoid sensitive areas, we've sought to design around it through things like what we call trenchless crossings. So it's how we lay the drill or lay the ducts where the cables are going to be sited within the ground. You can do that through drilling rather than digging, and other forms of embedded mitigation, which I'll come on to later. As part of the scheme, we're proposing a main construction compound, and the siting of the main construction compound has benefited from local community involvement. So again, we've had to set out the engineering criteria that we would need to follow to ensure that the site was suitable. So that includes things like access, land availability. The site needs to be at least 6 hectares. Measure 6 hectares in size, and then we've got all the ecological and environmental considerations, as well as community considerations such as proximity to residential areas. We also needed to be mindful of where other projects have sited their construction compounds. We had, when we went out to consultation, we did include a number of options for the main compound within the consultation. So we were able to take into account some feedback as part of the main consultation, as well as in terms of individual community engagement events that were also held. And then the final bit of infrastructure that I just wanted to touch on was the onshore substation. So before we connect into national grid, the cables need to connect into an onshore substation. The onshore substation is the final location sited just south of Norwich, Maine. And we selected the site based on, again, a whole host of environmental considerations. We started off with a long list of sites, and we were able to whittle those down based upon, as more information became available, as more feedback was received, we were able to select what we believe is the most appropriate site. So really quickly on embedded mitigation. So this featured fairly heavily within the design development process. And the optioneering criteria in the optioneering process. So what we wanted to do was to make sure that design mitigation was integrated into the scheme. So we've done that through through setting principles out within the optioneering criteria, which avoids key sensitive locations. We're proposing a haul road within our cable corridor itself, and that basically means that we're taking traffic off the local roads. And we're proposing to drill the ducts where the cables will be sited, where we are passing through sensitive environmental features. So to the north of the site, you can kind of see it on the image. We've got Weybourne Woods, and the green areas within our red line that shows where we're looking to drill. So we're looking to drill through most of Weybourne Woods. We're also going to use HDD to drill underneath key roads and to cross main rivers as well. We acknowledge that we cannot incorporate everything, all the mitigations within the design. So we have got a whole host of commitments as part of, commitments and controls as part of the DCO requirements and the protective provisions. They all need to be managed. And I've just listed some of the management plans on the slide. The design is not finalised. There's a whole host of further design work that needs to be done. We call those micrositing. So this is where the cable will actually be located. And again, the development of that will need to involve landowners and the local community, so we can make sure that we're siting the cable corridor and the cable in the best location. So in terms of the next steps for the project, we hopefully will have a decision in April. Before we start construction, we do need to do some pre-construction surveys. we need to appoint a contractor and reach various other milestones, which I mentioned in previous slides. So I rattled through that. I'm conscious of time. I just wanted to also just touch on reflections, specifically LPA challenges, as I think we've got quite a representation from local planning authorities here, and some of the engagement reflections. So I kind of feel like the planning process can be quite reactive, you know, sometimes I do feel like a regional local approach might be needed to consider the impacts of multiple projects in the same area. So the slide you've got in front of you shows the location of Norwich Main. Also shows the boundary of our development. It's the red line. You've got also Hornsey 3 in like that's greyed out. And there are so many developments in this area that all need to be considered in the round. There's the second bullet point refers to the resourcing and prioritisation of work streams. And there was a consultation last year that the government launched on operational reforms to the NSIPs, and it acknowledged that the resourcing of local authorities in dealing with NSIPs is a highly intense activity, and we need to do better at resourcing this work stream. The application documents themselves, they're huge. They're really difficult, even as a developer, they're really difficult to navigate through. So we need to do what we can to help not just local planning authorities, but all our stakeholders navigate through those documents. Linking with the resource intensive theme, we've got the different phases of the development. You've got the pre-application phase, and during consultation it's highly resource intense, but also the examination itself. And that's another reactive process where basically and others need to respond to the examining authority within set timeframes to meet the overarching programme. And that includes appearing at hearings. An opportunity is capturing lessons learned from managing multiple projects. So, set debt, we're hopefully going to receive a decision, and we're keen to engage with the local planning authorities that we are affecting to find out how they manage other projects and, capture some of those lessons learned in terms of how they manage and we manage our project. And then the final bullet point there just refers to the strategic approach. So the focus here is very much local, but there are various government consultations that if we all have the resource to, we can contribute that, really would shape the evolving policy framework. You'll be pleased to know this is my last slide now. So reflections on engagement. So we have sought to ensure that engagement has been and remains central to the planning process for SEP and DEP, and it needs to continue. Engagement is really challenging, trying to make sure the right people are being consulted in a meaningful way and creating those conditions for community involvement. And it's challenging not just because that's challenging in its own right, but there are different projects which are subject to different phases, and navigating the process and the documentation is quite tricky. There's an element of stakeholder fatigue here. And because of this, we found that some people don't actually engage until after the application has gone in, where it's very difficult to make changes to the scheme. But that's the point in time where the project does appear to be, I guess, most tangible, and where the public can make where their time is best spent. I feel that's the case, but I could be wrong, and that obviously doesn't apply to everyone. So in terms of prioritisation, we've already spoke about prioritisation of workloads. There is this, I guess, tension between the local and the strategic engagement. So the focus often tends to be planning at a local level. There are the opportunities to participate in the debate at the more strategic level. Again, it's subject to resource constraints, but this does shape the framework. And that could be just some themes in respect to the need for energy, emerging policy, so the offshore transmission network review, biodiversity net gain, and also with respect to community benefit. Again, there was a consultation on community benefit last year. And then in addition to all of this, there's the opportunity to get involved in the process that sit alongside planning. So specifically with reference to energy, Ofgem have a whole host of consultations which influence, where infrastructure is sited and how it's constructed and so on. So yeah, so I guess in terms of a conclusion on that, engagement is challenging, but I think that particularly reflecting on the local planning authorities' experience, that there are a series of lessons learned that we can adopt to try and make sure that we are doing this in the best possible way, and we do need to have the flexibility to do that. So I will stop speaking now, and hopefully Tom's mic's working.
Let's hope so. Tom's hopefully waiting in the wings. If not, we'll have to improvise.
I think you can hear me now.
Yes, brilliant. Take it away.
Sorry about that. Okay, thank you. I think it's an issue with the headphones. Now, I was meant to go second, so I should put a place on the record my thanks to Sherry and Graham for basically almost covering everything that possibly needs to be said. But I note that people will want the opportunity to ask questions, so I will endeavour to get through these slides as quickly as possible. My name's Tom McGarry. I joined National Grid less than a year ago, but suffice to say, I can't really play the new boy card anymore. So I will endeavour to answer your questions. If I can't, I will take them away and get back to you. I have worked on a mix of developments around the east of England for the best part of 2 decades, mainly Sizewell C, actually for a brief period of time there with Sherry, and also, of course, under Graham's very professional scrutiny. So now at External Affairs at National Grid, and I live in Suffolk, and I'm very familiar with our part of the world. So to begin, I appreciate that I've been asked today to give an overview of the energy challenges facing the country and to give some detail of what National Grid feels is necessary for the East of England, and to focus on our work to engage the public, as of course what much of planners and their project team colleagues do is encourage public participation in land use decisions. I noted the frustration that was expressed by Graham earlier in relation to another company, but in this slide you can indeed see how the National Grid Group plc is divided into 4 legally separate companies. I work in strategic infrastructure, which is part of National Grid electricity transmission, and we own and manage the high voltage electricity transmission system in England and Wales. National Grid Electricity Distribution owns and operates the distribution networks for the Midlands, the southwest of England and South Wales, with 8 million customer connections serving 18 million people. So the distribution network operator in the east is UK Power Networks, but we are also a DNO effectively as well. The electricity system operator is legally separate from the rest of National Grid and ensures that Great Britain has the essential energy it needs by making sure supply meets demand every second of every day, and also has a crucial role in planning and shaping the network. And National Grid Ventures is a mix of energy assets and businesses to help accelerate the development of our clean energy future, such as undersea interconnectors that allow the UK to share energy with other European countries. And that is the part of National Grid that is taking forward the Lion Link project that Graham referred to, the interconnector with the Netherlands. So the way we generate electricity is changing rapidly, as you can see from this slide. We all understand this, and we all know that this is ultimately the driver to all of these NSIPs that are, nationally significant infrastructure projects, acronyms all over the place in planning, and also, unfortunately, in the energy sector too. So I'll try and behave myself on that. But we all understand this is the key driver. When I first started working in the energy sector back in 2010, as we'll see, which I suppose tells its own story given that development consent only happened in 2022. But when I first started working in the energy sector, coal was king back in 2010. Over 50% of the mix, of the generation mix, was from coal. But with now coal basically counting for almost 0%, gas continues to be the bridging fuel towards a very much greener grid. Our current generation mix today in Great Britain is we've got 30% of our electricity being generated by wind, 30% by gas, 15% through imports, 11% by nuclear, 6% by solar, and 6% by biomass. The calculation is that puts us in a place where we're 49% of the mix is zero carbon. With a situation where demand is set to double because of the electrification of more and more of our transport sector, and indeed heating and cooling our homes and businesses and public services, we are seeing demand going to rise at a time when there is also, we are chasing, if you like, to keep up with that demand. So it is important that we have this acknowledgement that we need to keep the momentum up. As much as there were some very nice facts and progressive figures on the previous slide, there is a challenge ahead. The UK has some really ambitious targets around decarbonising the system. And we've been challenged to bring on 50 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030 and thereafter to decarbonise the energy system by 2035, ultimately leading to a net zero UK. And the drivers behind all of this development are ultimately shown in that small infographic there, the triangle of energy security, energy affordability, and energy sustainability. Essentially, the drive for net zero, for more affordable electricity bills, and indeed for energy security, for us to generate our own renewables, to provide that security for Britain without a dependence on imports, in particular gas. Now, as we've seen a step change in how we generate electricity, and it's driving the need to change the electricity transmission grid. The existing transmission network was not designed to transport electricity from where we increasingly now generate it, which is largely offshore and, of course, on the coast with nuclear power stations. Growth in offshore wind, interconnectors and nuclear power means that more electricity will be generated in the years ahead than the current network is able to securely and reliably transport. As a country, electricity demand, as I've mentioned, is set to double by 2050, increasing the amount of energy we need to transport to homes and businesses. And upgrading the existing network as it is today, such as through replacing cables to carry more power, will not necessarily be enough to carry the amount of future power whilst operating to required standards. To do that, we essentially need to rewire the whole transmission grid across the UK. As I've mentioned, the system we have today was set up in the 50s and 60s to take electricity from old coal-fired power stations in the centralised regions of Britain into the urban and industrial centres in the north and south. National Grid's been asked by a regulator to deliver 17 new projects under a new scheme called Accelerated Strategic Transmission Infrastructure, or ASTI, and indeed to be ready for whatever comes next. On the back of that, it's more infrastructure to be delivered in the next 7 to 8 years than we have completed in the last 4 decades. We refer to this as the Great Grid Upgrade, the 17 major new projects to connect clean, low carbon power to the transmission network in England and Wales. And I think Great Grid Upgrade is perhaps a little more catchy than Accelerated Strategic Transmission Infrastructure. These projects play a vital part in achieving the UK's ambitions of connecting 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. This new and upgraded infrastructure will range from uprating of existing transmission lines from 275 kilovolts to 400 kilovolts, new substations, high voltage direct current interconnector cables, through to new transmission lines. And as well as these 17 projects, National Grid will also focus on the early stage development of other strategic infrastructure that Ofgem has requested we examine. The amount of overhead line in some of our current proposals means that several projects have been classed as nationally significant infrastructure projects under the Planning Act 2008. And of course, that means we need to apply for development consent order to build and operate it. And I'm sure that everybody in the audience on this particular webinar is very well aware of the process we need to go through and the importance of consultation to it. Before building new lines in the challenge to deliver 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, we are increasing the capability of the existing network by upgrading lines and installing power control equipment. Those works will only increase the capability to move power from the north to the Midlands to 14 gigawatts. It needs much more. We need to add additional network capability to move more power from the north to the Midlands and connect planned offshore wind interconnectors and the HVDC links. In terms of the scale of what we need to achieve, we will need to put in 12,000 kilometres of new conductor. And to put that in perspective, that's the diameter of the Earth. We will require 35,000 tonnes of new steel for new pylons, and that's the equivalent of more than 4 Eiffel Towers. And not only that, as I mentioned earlier, we need to do this at a pace and a scale that we've never done before, including all of the complexities of having to achieve planning consent and to plan all of this while bringing local communities along the journey with us. And also, it's worth noting Graham's point. The current suite of network reinforcements are aimed at getting us to the 2030 offshore wind targets. The electricity systems operator will soon publish the transitional combined centralised strategic network plan, which is looking beyond 2030 and looking at how much more infrastructure will be required to get to net zero in 2050. Now, this actually links to what we believe the system needs, and that's a strategic spatial energy plan, where government can set out what it wants and where in the country it needs to be, so that we can work with the electricity systems operator, with Ofgem, and indeed in consultation with local communities, local authorities and so on, to develop a full centralised strategic network plan. So therefore providing a more holistic and longer term view on the electricity network landscape. At present, of course, though, we have these pressing deadlines in order to meet 2030. The challenge in the east of England, we have a significant amount of energy generation above current capacity connecting into Norwich and Necton. And this has already been referred to by Graham and indeed by Sherry as well. We know the policy drivers taking this forward. And it's worth bearing in mind that offshore wind is not just a great British success story, it's a great East of England success story. 5 gigawatts. That's 44% of the UK fleet is operating off the coast of the east of England. That's 13 operating projects and over 1,000 wind turbines. 2,500 people in the east of England are employed within the sector. In development are 9.7 gigawatts of power, which would be the capacity of these forthcoming projects. We are one of the world's largest offshore wind clusters. Indeed, the Hornsey group of wind farms, once built out in total, would be total up to 6 gigawatts. That's 2 sizable seas load capacity within the North Sea, connecting into Necton. The existing transmission network in the east of England, precisely the same situation as I've outlined for all of Britain. It was built in the 1960s to supply regional demands centred around Norwich and Ipswich. And with the growth in new energy from this offshore wind, Sizewell C and so on, there will be more electricity connected in East Anglia than the network can currently accommodate. So over the next decade, we expect between 14 gigawatts and 18.5 gigawatts of new generation and new interconnection to connect in the region. And our existing power lines do not have sufficient capacity to accommodate that new generation. And it's important to note that the power needs to be taken from where it is generated here in the east, across what is a network across Britain, to where it is needed. And it's worth noting that around 80% of electricity at peak demand is consumed outside London. As I mentioned before, we always consider building before we consider building new parts of the network, we must first consider whether we can achieve more capability by upgrading and strengthening the existing network. Now, this can involve changing the conductors, wires, and so on, some of our existing overhead lines, and adding smart power control devices to control the flow of electricity on parts of the network to transport it to where it is needed. In the east of England, we're installing power control devices at main substations in the region to make more use of an existing route to the west. We're rewiring existing overhead lines with conductors that can carry more power. For example, on the existing overhead lines from Bramford to Braintree to Rayleigh to Tilbury, Twinstead and Pelham, and between Norwich and Bramford, and increasing the voltage of a section of line from Waltham Cross in Hertfordshire into London to 400 kilovolts to increase the capability of that part of the network. Making these improvements will increase the capability of the existing network, but it is still insufficient to deliver the capacity required and that we need, and so therefore we need to build new reinforcements. Graham has already explained Bramford to Twinstead, Norwich to Tilbury and Sea-Link. Just to reiterate, Bramford to Twinstead is the network reinforcement between Bramford substation in Suffolk and Twinstead T in Essex. The proposals include constructing up to 18 kilometres of overhead line and around 11 kilometres of underground cable through the Dedham Vale AONB and in the Stour Valley. I think it's probably worth noting as well that we are coming to the end of the examination of Bramford to Twinstead, and we will be anticipating the decision to be announced in Q3 of this year. In terms of Norwich to Tilbury, this is the network reinforcement between the existing substations at Norwich Main in Norfolk, Bramford in Suffolk and Tilbury in Essex, as well as connections to new offshore wind generation. Proposals include 183 kilometres of new electricity transmission line between Norwich and Tilbury, and this would be made up mostly of overhead line and pylons, along with some underground cables and a new 400 kV substation. Many people on the call may well be aware of the electricity systems operator currently undertaking an East Anglian study following the Offshore Coordination Support Scheme publication. So as the government announced the outcome of the first phase of this, subject to the outcomes of that study, we will back check and review any of those proposals taken forward before we go out to our next stage, which will be our statutory stage of consultation to Norwich to Tilbury. In terms of Grain to Tilbury, that's the construction of a new cable under the Thames between Kent and Essex to reinforce the local network. The existing cable tunnel between Tilbury and Gravesend is more than 50 years old and is coming to the end of its useful life. And Sea-Link is reinforcing the electricity transmission network between Suffolk and Kent through building a new, primarily offshore 2 gigawatt high voltage direct current link. So Norwich to Tilbury is a key part of our wider investment programme to upgrade our electricity to transmission network in East Anglia to ensure we meet this future energy transition demand. And along with other projects, it's a priority because the Midlands, South and East of England have been identified as areas in need of network reinforcement to enable the connection to more offshore wind on the east coast. In terms of our consultation and communications activity, we have been developing this far more over the last 6 months. We have engaged in the public consultation activities that you would anticipate to be very important and integral part of the whole DCO process. But indeed, we also undertake this consultation activity for Town and Country Planning Act applications too, across our fleet of assets within National Grid. I think the most important thing that we would reflect on and take away, and indeed many people on the call who work within consultancies or within other businesses, and of course in local authorities that are almost on a continuous roll of various different public consultations, is to make sure colleagues are very well briefed, that there are regular site visits and consultation training, that the community is at the heart of being informed about proposals and consulted. I think that there is a view that Graham reflected on there, where some proposals seem to come forward as a fait accompli. I don't think that's necessarily fair, particularly when one looks at the way that the consultations are structured in a multi-stage fashion. So Norwich to Tilbury, for example, we did look at the first stage of consultation at a graduated swathe of land. That's what they call it. It's a swathe of land where the overhead lines could be located. However, preceding that was a lot of technical assessment and environmental surveys to inform all sorts of options, including an offshore option as well. And we publish a strategic options review that can identify why we have arrived at what we feel is the best technical solution, and indeed meets our regulatory requirements to provide cost-effective solutions as well for the consumer, for the energy bill payer. So we go out and we consult on a swathe of land, and then we come back to consult again, following that feedback and following further assessment on the actual route that we may take forward towards submission for a development consent order. Naturally, wherever the route is going to be proposed, there is concern, and we have to have empathy and work closely with those local communities to see what can be done, to see how things can be improved as much as possible. I think it's very important that in terms of consultation, not only are we taking on board key stakeholder engagement and that of neighbours and the community and so on, but we also need to make sure that we are providing materials in our consultation activity that are useful for local residents. So, for example, we will be investing in CGI technology so that we can show indicative views of how the pylons and the cables can look on the landscape, and indeed, of course, the activity we would engage in terms of undergrounding. The campaign that is being launched at the moment, of course, is the Great Grid Upgrade. But ultimately, I think the word campaign can have connotations of us trying to promote something to sell. Ultimately, Great Grid Upgrade is a good explanation for what has to be undertaken here. It's 40 years since the last Great Grid Upgrade, and now we need a new one if we are going to actually make the most of the British success story that is offshore wind. And if we're going to meet energy security, and if we're going to deliver more affordable bills, and if we're going to reach net zero, there is a huge change that has to be undertaken as part of that upgrade. And finally, around collaboration. So the government had its consultation on community benefits. Now, this has had quite a mixed reception in terms of what was announced in the autumn statement about how that could work for local communities and indeed residents living near this infrastructure. The way we're taking this forward is that we absolutely believe that communities that are in a position where they have to host infrastructure do need to see the benefits of infrastructure within their local area. Now, that should be informed by consultation, but also wider legacy and partnerships are absolutely key as well. We do have a very regulated pound for any element we put in to community benefit and indeed wider socioeconomic benefit. But what we ultimately want to see is that just as the Great Grid upgrade will deliver that environmental progress, we also want to deliver socioeconomic progress as well. So that will be working with local authorities and in partnership with third sector organisations, chambers of commerce, local colleges, for example, in order to look at skills, employment initiatives, and essentially to upskill all of the regions where we are working, in particular East Anglia, for the challenges ahead. Graham and Sherry just noted that, the workforce demand and so on, there is a skills demand, and we should all be working towards making sure that these sorts of long-term legacy benefits are experienced from these projects. I'll be quiet there now so that there can be time for questions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you all for those presentations and for running to time. So that gives us time for consultation. It's a little bit difficult to keep track of what's going on in the chat. So Bev may want to jump in. Sherry and Graham, if you want to put your cameras on, please do. My initial look at the chat suggests there was a few questions that could be sort of bundled up and directed to you, Sherry. First one, for the Sheringham and Dudgeon extensions, why was Walpole, which is a village in Norfolk, excluded? Can you make any comment on the social and economic, socio-economic impacts and how they've been assessed? And how do you keep the communities informed when frequently you're having to go through lots of design changes? So 3 in 1 there.
Sure. So the first one on Walpole, so I alluded to in the presentation about other processes going on in parallel, and the location of the connection point to Norwich Main was one of those processes. It's the connection point was actually chosen through what's called a connection and infrastructure options notes process. It's run by Ofgem, and it's to do, my understanding is to do with where the capacity for the onward energy transmission exists. So Norwich Main was chosen as the best location, and therefore Walpole wasn't considered as part of the DCO application, but it was considered as part of that Ofgem optioneering process. In terms of the socioeconomic assessment, so we did complete a socioeconomic impact assessment as part of the environmental impact assessment, and that considered a whole host of socioeconomic factors, so workforce, accommodation, tourism, and in terms of what we think a good result would be. It would be, developing the skills and employment base further within the local area, so that local people have the opportunity to work not just on the construction phase, but also during operation. We've got the O&M base, the operations and maintenance base in Great Yarmouth. We are engaging with the local authorities as well, and whilst we don't think that we're going to have a tourism impact, we've agreed with North Norfolk District Council that will complete a tourism study looking at the impacts of offshore wind developments within coastal communities. So, the results of that will be very interesting. I guess in terms of other social impacts, it links actually, I think, to the next question. It's ensuring that the communities can remain engaged throughout the whole process, not just during consent, but post-consent and as we get to implementation, so that if there is an impact, we're able to identify it and respond to it and manage it accordingly. And then linked to the final question about community engagement and ensuring that the community remains engaged. So many on the webinar will be aware that there is, the consultation is key in developing a DCO application, and there are very strict consultation requirements. Those requirements, they do need to evolve as you get into the next phase of the development. And we've made commitments within our plans, our outline code of construction practice about community engagement. So we will have to appoint, we actually already have appointed a stakeholder liaison officer. For landowners, we've got, particularly farmers, we've got agricultural liaison officers that will be appointed. So we've got people actively engaging with the community, but in addition to that, the project as a whole will need to continue engaging with the community and keeping the community updated as to what's going on. And there are various mechanisms that we've got, like hotlines and other ways to contact us regarding any questions that anybody might have. I think that answers the 3 questions you posed to me, Adam.
I'd say it does.
Okay.
That's great. Bev, was there anything you spotted from the chat and the Q&A that you wanted to put to the panel?
Yep, I've got 2 questions for Graham, really. The first is the National Infrastructure Commission's publication recently on the scope for exploring a local electricity grid. Is this something you're likely to be responding to?
Yeah, it's not on my radar, but others probably are. We do feed into the National Infrastructure Commission, and so yeah, I think we probably will, because we're interested in certainly some of these schemes, the big 400 kV reinforcements. It's quite an interesting one. Is that you can rationalise the system. In terms of the smaller 132s and stuff like that. So we're really quite interested in that, because we know that it's a real local electricity networks are a real block on developing renewable energy. For instance, you can't export power from a factory roof solar system. Because you cannot supply the system. So yeah, we probably will. I don't know what the deadline on that is, but I'm not sure if anybody else is looking at it back at SCC, but I'll take that one down.
Okay, thank you. And then another one, Graham, is that work that's been looked at, the cumulative impacts around the various works at Saxmundham, Friston, Sizewell and the adjoining areas. Can you just say a bit how that's being considered?
Yes, I mean, every time. So there's a number of developments focusing on a proposed new substation at Friston, which is consented, but is under legal challenge at the present time. More than one legal challenge, and other schemes would connect to that, including Line Link and Sea Link, and every single time. And obviously, it's in the general locality of Sizewell. So every single time we meet with them, or virtually every single time, we ram home that point about working together. And I'm pleased to say that they are looking at, in particular, Sea Link are. They're looking to rationalise what they do. I think under their scheme, they're offering the potential to coordinate 3 projects, and that extends to their converter station site, the haul road to that XYZ. And, it's very interesting when you look at what generates the lorry movements on projects like that. Well, it can be things like the haul road and, hundreds of thousands of tons of aggregate. Well, if they can use the same haul road or reuse the aggregate, well, that's a big win. It's at the level where it requires junction improvements just to facilitate that. So we're on it, and we're trying to ram that one home. And I do. To be fair, I think they are looking at that kind of thing.
Okay, this one might be for you, Tom, about the start date for the Norwich to Tilbury statutory consultation, please, so everyone is aware of that.
get the hang of this mic eventually. So there's no confirmed start date yet. I did mention the ESO study looking at what may come out of that. There needs to be obviously time to back check and review, so it would be after that, but we would anticipate or aim for around some point in the second quarter of this year.
Okay, well, now you've got your mic working, can I just ask another question, Tom? How much do you anticipate the Norwich to Tilbury plans changing as a result of the ESO East Anglia study, noting the close working between ESO and NGET?
So it's important to note that ESO is independent. They're undertaking this study, of which we too are a consultee, as are many others, and I have no idea what they're going to publish in terms of their final publication date, and they quite jealously guard that as well. So I think it's important to note that obviously, we have to deliver what is proposed out of the various different NOAAs, TCSNPs, and so on, and all the other acronyms in order to deliver connection. But I think the important point to note is that, in particular, on the ESO study, let's see what is published, and then we will have to. We have committed to back check and review in time for the consultation.
Okay, I think this is quite a big topic, and it's one that's quite often is being discussed. It's about views on the SAP DEP offshore grid for the North Sea.
Now, is that general or is that me?
I'm not sure who it's targeted at. If anyone wants to jump in on that one.
Yes, so the government is progressing the delivery of its offshore transmission network review, and that's about sharing transmission infrastructure. It's something that's evolving. It's not proposed for SEP and DEP. But what we are proposing is to include an option whereby we can share the transmission infrastructure as part of the projects. And to do that, that would mean reducing the impact in terms of construction, that's basically why SEP and DEP has been awarded a pathfinder status, because it's one of the first projects to propose to share transmission infrastructure and to keep that option open.
Okay, I've just got two more questions that I'm grouping together. One's about the influence of local nature recovery strategies, how they might influence route choices and mitigation choices, and also, is the cabling techniques effective to avoid damaging woodlands?
So if I start with I think they're directed at me.
Yeah.
So I start with the second question first. So the impacts of drilling underneath the Weybourne Woods. So we're proposing to drill under Weybourne Woods to avoid impacts to those trees, and the depth of the drill will be such that we would avoid impacts to the trees. Because of the length of the woods, there is one area where we're actually going to the drill will have to sort of come up and go back down again. It's called a reception pit, and the location that we've actually chosen for the reception pit is an area where there are a number of dead or dying trees. So the impacts would be reduced in that regard. But yes, it's to do with the depth of the drill. And I've forgotten what I think it was the second question is now. Apologies.
It is about local nature recovery strategies. Will they influence route choices and mitigation?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we've when we were carrying out the optioneering, we sought to identify the cable corridor to avoid local nature recovery schemes, and where we were crossing areas of environmental sensitivity, sought to do that through use of trenchless crossing techniques. Now, the situation does change over time, and we do appreciate that between, you know, even submission of the application or finalising the plans, the baseline, the ecological baseline does change, and that's why we carry out pre-construction ecological surveys, so we can understand what the situation is on the ground just before we start construction, and have the flexibility to adjust the design accordingly. But we've sought to do that through incorporating embedded mitigation, incorporating trenchless techniques, and also working with landowners to identify where they are proposing local nature recovery schemes, and to avoid them if we can accordingly.
Thank you. I think we've done a fairly decent job there, Bev, on mopping up on the various questions that have come through. We have hit time, so I think